One of the most fascinating dynamics in relationships is when someone with an avoidant attachment style, someone who's built walls around their heart, meets a super empath. Because a super empath doesn't force, doesn't chase, doesn't manipulate. They create space, they listen, and slowly, almost invisibly, the walls start to come down. If you've ever wondered whether you're starting to melt the ice around an avoidant's heart, here are 5 signs to look for when someone with an avoidant attachment style begins to open up. It rarely happens in some grand, cinematic moment where they suddenly spill their deepest secrets. It almost never looks like the big, vulnerable declarations we see in movies. Instead, it happens in small, almost invisible ways, and those who aren't paying attention often miss it. This is where the presence of a super empath makes all the difference. Because empaths are tuned into nuance, they notice the subtle shifts. They can recognize that when an avoidant casually shares a detail about their day, it isn't just idle conversation, it's a tiny test. It's their way of asking, without words, "Are you safe with me? Can I trust you with this piece of me?" For avoidants, opening up is risky. Their entire identity often rests on independence, on the belief that they don't need anyone. That leaning on others will only lead to disappointment. That mindset is usually built from early experiences where vulnerability was met with rejection, neglect, or inconsistency. So when they do start letting someone in, it's rarely a big leap. It's a cautious step, and then another one, carefully observing how the other person responds. A super empath doesn't pressure them to share more. They don't pounce on the vulnerability or exaggerate its importance. Instead, they create a calm, safe environment where the avoidant feels seen, heard, and not judged. Imagine an avoidant saying something as simple as, "Work has been really stressful lately." To most, that's a throwaway comment. But for them, admitting stress is already letting down their guard because stress implies struggle and struggle implies they're not in total control. An empath doesn't rush in with solutions or dramatize it. They might just respond with something gentle like, "I can see why that would feel heavy," or even just hold eye contact with quiet presence. In that moment, the avoidant experiences something rare, vulnerability that doesn't lead to shame or loss of dignity. That's when the walls start to weaken. The process is slow. At first, the vulnerabilities are small and seemingly insignificant. They might tell you about a childhood story they don't normally share. They might reveal a quirk, an insecurity, or a past disappointment. Each little revelation is like a brick being quietly removed from the wall they've built around themselves. The empath notices these bricks falling without trying to speed up the process. They understand that real trust isn't rushed. The avoidant has to arrive at it on their own terms. What makes this so powerful is that the super empath doesn't need to force intimacy. Their presence is enough. By staying consistent, by not flinching when the avoidant lets down their guard, by treating these small disclosures as natural and safe, they send a powerful message. You don't have to be perfect here. You don't have to be invulnerable. I can handle who you really are. Over time, those small vulnerabilities become bigger ones, and the avoidant finds themselves doing something they never imagined possible, relying on another person emotionally, not out of fear or obligation, but out of trust. When an avoidant begins to soften under the steady influence of a super empath, one of the clearest signs of progress is when their actions start to align with their words. At the beginning, there's often a disconnect. They might say, "I'll call you tomorrow," but that call never comes. They may talk about wanting closeness or about making plans, yet their behavior betrays their discomfort. This mismatch isn't necessarily because they're dishonest or insincere. It's usually because following through feels too vulnerable. To follow through means allowing themselves to be depended on, and dependability requires emotional investment. For someone who has built their identity around self-reliance, that feels threatening. But when an empath enters their life, something begins to shift. The empath doesn't pressure or guilt them into consistency. Instead, they respond to the inconsistencies with compassion, patience, and boundaries. They show through their own steadiness what reliability looks like. Over time, the avoidant notices this difference. They begin to understand, often unconsciously, that keeping their word in this relationship doesn't lead to entrapment or loss of independence. It leads to safety. That's when a subtle but profound change begins. Words are no longer just placeholders or polite promises. They start turning into real action. It may begin in small, almost unnoticed ways. An avoidant might say they'll text later, and for the first time, they actually do. They may suggest grabbing coffee next week and then follow up to confirm it rather than letting it fade into nothing. These gestures might feel ordinary to most people, but in the world of avoidant attachment, they are huge breakthroughs. Every act of following through is a risk they're taking, choosing to show up, to be counted on, to step into intimacy rather than back away from it. What makes this so significant is that actions, not words, are the real proof of change. Words are easy to say, especially for someone who has spent years perfecting the art of keeping others at just the right distance. But when actions begin to back those words, it signals that their internal world is changing. They're no longer fighting the instinct to pull away quite as strongly. They're beginning to believe, in small increments, that it's safe to commit in the little ways that build the foundation for deeper trust. This is where the presence of the super empath becomes vital. Instead of reacting with impatience or demanding grand gestures, the empath notices and validates these small steps. They don't make the avoidant feel like they're being measured on perfection, but they also don't ignore the progress. They treat each consistent action as evidence that the relationship can be trusted, reinforcing the avoidant's courage to keep going. Over time, these moments of alignment between words and actions stack up, slowly rewiring the avoidant's belief that intimacy is dangerous. They discover that not only can they say they care, but they can show it. And that showing it doesn't diminish them, it strengthens the connection. When an avoidant begins to show care, it rarely comes in the form of sweeping romantic gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, it appears in the smallest, most understated ways. These are the kinds of actions that could easily be overlooked by someone not paying close attention, but for a super empath, they're unmistakable signals of change. Avoidants often struggle with over-expressions of affection because those require vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens the protective walls they've spent years building. So rather than big proclamations, what slips through are micro moments, tiny demonstrations that reveal a growing emotional investment. It might be something as simple as remembering the way you take your coffee, and the next time you're together, they hand it to you without you asking. It could be them texting you a link to a song they thought you'd like, or checking in about a detail you mentioned days earlier. These aren't random gestures, they are careful signs that your presence has started to matter to them. For someone who usually keeps relationships at a safe distance, these little acknowledgements are their way of saying, "I've been paying attention. You're on my mind even when you're not in front of me." What makes these micro moments so meaningful is that they bypass the avoidant's usual defenses. Big acts of care can feel overwhelming to them. They come with expectations and obligations they may not be ready to handle. But a quiet act of kindness, something small enough to feel safe, allows them to express their affection without the fear of being trapped. For an empath, these subtleties don't go unnoticed. They see the deeper intention behind the gesture, and rather than demanding more, they create space for these moments to grow naturally. Imagine an avoidant who typically avoids emotional conversations suddenly bringing up how your day went, not in a surface level way, but with genuine curiosity. Or picture them grabbing your favorite snack at the store, not because you asked, but because they remembered. In these seemingly insignificant details lies the evidence that their walls are shifting. They are starting to move from self-protection toward connection, from indifference toward investment. Over time, these small gestures begin to add up. Each one chips away at the belief that closeness will inevitably lead to pain or suffocation. Every act of care shows that they can participate in intimacy without losing themselves. And when those actions are met with acknowledgement rather than pressure, it reinforces to the avoidant that it's safe to keep showing up in this way. For the empath, recognizing these moments is key. It's easy to dismiss them as too minor or to crave bigger, bolder signs of affection. But the empath's gift is in seeing what others might overlook, the way the avoidant is quietly saying, "I care," without using those exact words. And in those tiny acts of care, something profound is happening. The avoidant is beginning to risk connection one micro moment at a time. One of the clearest signals that an avoidant is slowly letting their guard down is when they begin to stay present in uncomfortable moments instead of withdrawing. Avoidants are known for retreating the moment emotions get too intense. For them, discomfort in relationships, whether it's conflict, deeper intimacy, or even the vulnerability of being cared for, often feels threatening. Their instinct is to escape, either by shutting down emotionally, becoming distant, or physically removing themselves from the situation. It's not because they don't care, but because their nervous system has been conditioned to see closeness as unsafe. When a super empath enters the picture, the dynamic starts to shift. The empath doesn't chase when the avoidant pulls back, nor do they escalate the tension with pressure or ultimatums. Instead, they bring steadiness into moments of discomfort, showing that it's possible to face difficult feelings without everything falling apart. Over time, this creates a new experience for the avoidant discomfort that doesn't end in rejection or abandonment, but instead in connection. That's when they begin to take the risk of staying rather than running. At first, this may look subtle. An avoidant who would normally cut a conversation short when things get emotional might linger a little longer. Instead of walking away when a disagreement arises, they sit in silence, clearly uncomfortable but still present. These moments are huge milestones, even if they don't look dramatic. By staying, the avoidant is breaking their own pattern. They're choosing to tolerate the tension because, consciously or unconsciously, they're starting to feel that the relationship is worth it. The presence of the empath plays a critical role here, because the empath doesn't react with hostility or panic when the avoidant shows discomfort. They make the space safer. They might acknowledge the tension without demanding immediate resolution, or they might calmly validate what the avoidant is feeling. This non-reactive presence shows the avoidant that difficult emotions don't have to destroy closeness. Conflict doesn't automatically mean the end of the relationship. Vulnerability doesn't always lead to pain. Over time, each decision to stay instead of escape builds resilience. The avoidant slowly learns that their discomfort won't consume them and that intimacy doesn't always equal loss of control. They begin to trust that they can survive the unease of closeness and even grow from it. What once felt unbearable, sitting in raw honesty, facing conflict, admitting their own fears, becomes something they can handle, especially with an empath by their side modeling calm acceptance. This is why staying through discomfort is such a powerful sign. It shows that the avoidant isn't just testing the waters anymore, they're beginning to believe. The relationship offers a level of safety they haven't known before. They're choosing to stay not because it's easy, but because the empath's presence has helped them rewrite their old story, that intimacy is danger into a new one. That intimacy, even when uncomfortable, can actually be healing. When an avoidant begins to feel safe enough to let themselves be seen, something extraordinary happens. For most of their lives, they've carefully constructed an image of independence and control. They wear masks to keep others from getting too close, masks of capability, composure, or even aloofness. These masks are their armor, built from the belief that if people saw who they truly were, messy, uncertain, emotional, they would be rejected or hurt. To protect themselves, they hide behind performance. But when the influence of a super empath begins to soften those defenses, cracks in the mask start to appear, and instead of rushing to fix them, the avoidant allows them to remain, revealing more of their authentic self. This shift doesn't come with fanfare. It often begins in the quietest of ways. The avoidant might stop trying so hard to say the right thing and instead share what they actually think, even if it's clumsy or uncertain. They might let you see them tired, unpolished, or frustrated rather than putting on a calm facade. They might even allow you to witness their moments of insecurity or fear, things they've usually buried deep beneath a polished surface. These are not small gestures. For someone who has spent years equating authenticity with danger, being real in front of another person is a radical act of courage. A super empath recognizes this and meets it with acceptance. Instead of criticizing, laughing off, or diminishing the avoidant's honesty, they welcome it. They signal through their presence, "It's safe to be you here." This lack of judgment is what encourages the avoidant to reveal more. Each time they allow themselves to be seen and are met with warmth instead of rejection, a new story is written in their nervous system, one where authenticity doesn't lead to abandonment, but to closeness. One of the most telling moments is when an avoidant feels safe enough to express emotions in real time rather than hiding them. They may cry in front of you, admit they're scared, or acknowledge they're uncertain about what they're feeling. To an outside observer, this might not look monumental, but for the avoidant, it's the equivalent of stepping out onto a ledge without a safety net. They are saying, in effect, I trust that you can see me at my most vulnerable and not use it against me. Even everyday behaviors can take on deep meaning. If the avoidant lets their guard down enough to joke freely, act silly, or show quirks they usually conceal, it's a sign they're no longer performing. They've moved from being guarded participants in the relationship to genuine partners who are willing to risk being fully themselves. This is the ultimate sign that the walls are not just cracking, but truly coming down. What makes this stage so profound is that it signals a shift from survival mode to connection. When an avoidant can be unfiltered in your presence, it means they've stopped bracing for rejection. They've started to believe, perhaps for the first time, that love doesn't require perfection, and that being seen, not the curated version, but the real version, is enough. And so, when you look at these 5 signs together, those tiny moments of vulnerability, the shift from words to actions, the subtle gestures of care, the willingness to stay through discomfort, and finally, the courage to be fully seen, you realize something powerful: walls don't fall with force, they dissolve with safety. A super empath doesn't break someone open, they invite them to open on their own. That's the beauty of real connection. It's not about fixing someone or dragging them into love. It's about showing up with such presence and patience that love becomes safe enough to step into. If you've ever wondered whether your empathy makes a difference, remember this: it's not the loud, dramatic moments that change people. It's the quiet, consistent ones. Every time you hold space instead of judging, every time you stay steady instead of running, every time you honor even the smallest gesture of openness, you're helping to rewrite someone's story about love. And that's what breaking down an avoidance walls is truly about. It's not just about building a relationship. It's about helping another human being discover that closeness can feel like freedom, not fear. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, for listening deeply, and for being open to seeing relationships in a new light. Your presence here shows your commitment to growth, not just for yourself, but for the people you love. I hope you take these insights with you, apply them gently, and watch how they transform the way you connect. I appreciate you, I value you, and I'm grateful we could share this journey together today. Until next time, take care of your heart, stay true to your empathy, and know that your quiet strength makes a bigger impact than you may ever realize. Thank you, and goodbye.